And today I'm joined by Elliot Kenter. So, very briefly, what would be your title at one of these secular conferences or events?
If I go to an event, I would be a consultant. I do this on a volunteer basis. There's no compensation to me for doing it. I got involved in a couple of they called them heads meetings back at the time, where the heads of the organizations got together. As time went by, we saw that there were issues related to inappropriate conduct, inappropriate behavior. And since I had some background in that from my previous professional experience, I wanted to get involved in trying to help mitigate that and try to figure out ways that we could do that. And I found that for me, the way that I contribute the best would be to help write policies and procedures, codes of conduct, and then train people at those conventions that if they noticed or someone came to them with an issue, to go and investigate that issue to the best extent that we possibly could. We put in codes of conduct. We created training that have evolved over a period of time. From my perspective, and I can't speak for other people that do this, I had an NDA for all the organizations that I work with, a non-disclosure agreement, for the obvious reason. But I'm the only one. If someone came to me with an issue or someone made a complaint, they don't have an NDA. They can say whatever they want, whenever they want. We have, or I had no control over that. And that's, I think, necessary to identify because people have free speech. They can say or choose to say whatever they want. I would ask them that if we're in an investigation to give us the opportunity to at least have the conversation with the people we needed to talk to before they told anyone else. Secondly, the other agreement I had was that I was going to wind up being autonomous. I was going to wind up pulling the string on an investigation until the very end. And if we found wrongdoing, we were going to take some action. And there was no alternative to that. And there's a variety of different actions that could be taken, from having a simple conversation with someone to asking them to removing them from the conference. And during the course of our lifetime of doing these things, we've done those. We've asked people to leave. We've sequestered them to their rooms, a variety of different things. What we don't do is we don't call the police unless we absolutely observe something that happened. We would call for medical assistance if that was necessary, but it would have to be observed or asked for. There's four walls in terms of limits of what we could or couldn't do. So I would pull the string on an investigation until it was over. No one controlled the investigation but me. I reported directly to the board. I would make recommendations on findings. If there was a finding, what we should do. If there wasn't a finding, then you can't always have a finding. But ideally, people never know there's an investigation. They're not supposed to know. Not
Yeah.
from me. If someone, an alleged victim, wants to share their story, they can absolutely do that. They have every right to do that. But me or the board or the organizations, historically, we don't do that. That's what an NDA is for. So you could have 8, 10, 15 investigations and no one would ever know, which is
Yeah.
exactly what's supposed to happen. No one is supposed to know. There's a right
So,
of privacy for everybody.
you mentioned that you had some past experience with security or something like that. What was that experience, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, in organizations that I ran, I was responsible for the loss prevention, either as a direct report to me or a dotted line. So we did hundreds of investigations relative to things that would occur in retail organizations. It could be theft, fraud, misappropriation of funds, a variety of different things. So I did hundreds and hundreds of investigations, or my group did. We were trained. We would go to seminars. We had significant training in how to approach these kind of investigations, formal training that went on for years and years. Same thing with sexual harassment, hostile work environment. The groups were trained, human resource groups were trained in these types of conversations, investigations, how to talk to someone, how to interview someone, how to interrogate someone. These are sit down classroom type of events.
How long have you been doing these conferences? And like, do you focus only on secular conferences, or do you do other types?
In doing loss prevention and sexual harassment, I've been doing that since the late 70s. In
Um,
terms of the conventions themselves, kind of when I semi-retired and really got involved in the secular community. So I've been doing that probably since about 2010, 2011, 15 years maybe. And I worked a variety of the conventions. And I don't really do that as much as I used to. I've kind of walked away from that a little bit.
and let's say on the highest year, how many conferences or conventions per year were you doing?
I probably would do somewhere around 6, 7, probably every other month. For me, going to the conventions was exciting because it was educational. I was able to perform a service at the convention while I happened to be there. But like I said, we paid our own way. We went to the conventions generally like everybody else. But we wanted to be involved in the community, and different people give in different ways. I thought my time was of more value than just giving money, and I could control that and how
Yeah.
I used that. And I wanted to be the master of how I did that. But we went to a variety of different conventions. We went to atheist conventions, agnostic conventions. We actually went to conventions outside of the community altogether. I did some conventions that were health related, food related, exercise related, and worked those conventions too. So our community is not the only community, obviously, that suffers from this type of issue. So every convention I went to, I offered that service, and generally, it was accepted. So, and again, I wasn't looking for compensation. We weren't
Right.
compensated for. I was going to be at that convention and offered that service. Trained who I had to train, and I should probably talk about what I mean by training. From the first time I went to the conventions, evolved very quickly in terms of what I wanted people to know. I wanted the trainees to be able to identify that if someone came to them because they'd either observed or had been harmed themselves, to initially put them in a safe space, ask if they needed medical attention, ask if they wanted to call the police, and then don't ask any other questions and get me. I've been trained in these investigations, and I didn't want people who weren't trained or who had a half hour or an hour's worth of conversation to start asking questions and get involved in an investigation because they're complicated, and ask the wrong question or do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. So when I am at a convention, I'm available the entire time the convention's there. If it's the middle of the night, I'm available in the middle of the night. If it's first thing in the morning, if it's the middle of the day, no matter what I do or am doing, I get to wherever I'm called immediately. And we've identified safe spaces in each convention where we could take people. And then I, along with a witness, would sit down and then have an interview with whoever it was that was necessary for us to talk to, for someone who had an issue, made a complaint, observed something, and then we would start the investigation. And like I said, once it started, the only one who had the ability to stop it was me. I'd pull the string until we were done. And once we were done, I'd make a recommendation. Of all the ones I've done, there's only been one time where I made a recommendation where it wasn't taken, and that was its own ball of wax altogether. But it happens occasionally.
Yeah.
We have a disagreement.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, I was talking to another member of the community who's also an organizer, Ember. She pointed out that a lot of people wrongly assume that when you're organizing an event, you can just pay a fee to a venue and just throw something together overnight. And I have personally helped organize both indoors and outdoor large events. For example, the March for Science here in Houston, we had about 15,000 people come. It was an outdoor event, obviously, but we had a stage and we had speakers and we had musical guests. We had to be in touch with the police departments in order to do street closings and all of that stuff. So I can corroborate that there is so much that goes into planning a large event. A lot of organizations have event planning committees, including a separate safety committee. And it's one of the most basic requirements of any venue is going to be that you have a safety plan. And very often these can be non-negotiables. If you don't have one, they're just not even going to accept your money or your offer to host an event there. It's something that you have to have in writing even before you reach out to a venue to organize something. Has that been your experience to where these conventions, do they always have a safety plan?
Well, it's an interesting question because when you go into a venue, we're guests. The venue is the one who really owns the processes, and you offer a service within the confines of your convention, but you have to live within the four walls of the rules of the space that you go to because it belongs to them. And we can talk about Vegas because so many happen there. So historically, what happens if we have a convention at a hotel, I go and interface and see if I can meet with their director of security and say and introduce myself to them and typically to the manager of the hotel and say, we're having the event here. I'm responsible for this piece of the venue. Tell me what you want to hear from me. And I'd like for us to meet every day. If your security is aware of something that happened or you want us involved, I'll do that. If I hear something, I'll let you know. But they really set the rules. So if we have a convention in any hotel, we're limited to the rules that the hotel allows us to operate in. We can go and create a code of conduct, which we do, which we show to the hotel, and let them know we have people that are going to be involved in trying to create a safe space. So if we have a issue, we communicate that with the hotel because it's still their space. And we need to have some conversation with them to how to know that they potentially have other guests that are at risk. We are still in their venue. We don't have access. If they have cameras, we don't have access to those cameras. But we can ask if there's an event or an issue, can we view the videos? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It all depends on the relationship. We had one convention that I worked at, we had the same year, every year at the same time, and I got to be really friendly with the person who was the director of security. I had coffee with them every morning. Anytime we had an issue, we had their resources available to us to use. But having said that, there's still some pretty significant limits to what that means. So no one has an obligation to talk to us. It's not like we're at work. If we're at work and something happens, generally you have an obligation to talk if your employer starts an investigation. But if you're a visitor at a conference and I want to talk to someone who may or may not have been involved or observed something, they have no obligation to talk to me and I can't make them. Same thing with a convention. We had an issue at one convention where someone came to us and said that in real time, they were threatened, physically threatened. When that happened, I felt that we had an obligation to go to the hotel and tell them someone has come to us and told us they're being threatened. The hotel made a decision that they were going to keep an eye on that person, rightfully, because if I've told them and they get hurt and they didn't do anything about it, they're liable in some sense. So they have their cameras, and this happened to be in Las Vegas, and they kept an eye. Now, people feel they're getting spied on. It's not being spied on in that sense. It's being careful that someone made a threat and the hotel is ensuring the safety, not just of them, but of all their other guests. So they have a much broader context that they view it in. For us, we're myopic. We're interested in the people at our convention. For the hotel we're in, we're their guests. There's us and maybe a couple thousand other people. It's not just that we're the only ones there. We have to interface, we do interface with the people that are responsible with the venue that we're in. We try and be good partners with them. We had an incident at one of the conventions where the director of loss prevention came to me and said that someone was throwing stuff off the balcony, and their room was on the 12th floor. Would I go up there and manage that and do something about that? And I said, sure. So, and as I was going to do that, the police came and they managed it. But we'll do the thing, whatever we have to do to try and maintain whatever decorum is necessary. We wear a lot of hats when we do this, but the biggest hat that I think that we have on is to create an environment of a safe space so that people can go and have a good time. Different conventions and different people have an opinion about what is a good time. In some conventions, they have alcohol, and probably in some conventions, they don't. And in some conventions, there's a concern about people and how they interact. And they code how people interact. Sometimes if they have I'm kind of just generalizing, but if they have a red dot on their name tag, they don't want to be interacted with at all. A yellow dot, they want to initiate contact. A green dot, contact completely. You expect that people will honor those things. Some conventions don't have anything like that at all. Some conventions say, we're not going to control how much liquor you drink. You're an adult. You're responsible for yourself. Some want to try and control that. It's literally impossible, I think. Generally, conventions are to go for people to go and enjoy themselves and have a good time within limits. Some people do stupid stuff. You don't have to be an atheist, an agnostic, a humanist to do something
Human.
stupid. People do
You just gotta
stupid
be a
stuff.
human. That's the only requirement.
And when they do it, if they do something that's untoward and it comes to us, we try and create a remedy. Are we perfect? Yeah, I'm human too. I mean, we do an investigation as good as we can. And once we do, we try and come up with a remedy for that if we find a solution. But you can't always find a solution. Another component of this, if we ask somebody to leave a convention because their behavior was inappropriate, I can't tell anybody that. I have a
Right.
non-disclosure agreement. The board, if that's who I report to, can tell anybody they want. And they probably won't, because then you enter into a level of liability potentially that becomes extremely problematic. And there's a group right now that's out there that's trying to address that. We tried to do something like this actually 15 years ago, where we wanted to compile a list of people that exhibited bad behavior at conventions. And attorneys, as we went through this process, were really concerned about the level of liability that could possibly and potentially be incurred if you shared that information inappropriately. It's a concern. The thing that I found mitigated it the most, if someone went to one convention and then was at another convention and I was there, was they knew I was there. My attendance was prophylactic in terms of exhibiting better behavior maybe than they did before. I'd walk up and say, "Hey, how you doing?" and just smile,
I
and
remember you.
without saying that. But,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm here. As I went to the same conventions over and over again annually, instances where people would talk to us increased, but the severity significantly decreased.
That's good.
Ultimately, conversations even stopped because people knew we were there and their behavior improved. At least that was my observation. So people knew we were there. They saw the code of conduct. They had to sign off on the code of conduct. They were aware of the code of conduct. And they were also aware that somebody was there who was going to wind up holding people accountable if they violated the code of conduct. So those are all important issues, I think, relative to do that. And I think more and more conventions had somebody like me doing that, where other people got involved in writing codes of conduct, executing codes of conduct. And I think there are people out there now that do that more than I do, or more than I did, because I just don't do it like I used to.